Darby's translation 1890. Luke 20. And it came to pass on one of the days, as he was teaching the people in the temple, and announcing the glad tidings, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders came up, and spoke to him, saying, Tell us by what authority thou doest these things, or who is it who has given thee this authority? And he answering said to them, I also will ask you one thing, and tell me, the baptism of John, was it of heaven or of men? And they reasoned among themselves, saying, If we should say, of heaven, he will say, Why have ye not believed him? But if we should say, of men, the whole people will stone us, for they are persuaded that John was a prophet. And they answered, They did not know whence. And Jesus said to them, Neither do I tell you by what authority I do these things. And he began to speak to the people this parable: A man planted a vineyard, and let it out to husbandmen, and left the country for a long time. And in the season he sent to the husbandmen a bondman, that they might give to him of the fruit of the vineyard. But the husbandman, having beaten him, sent him away empty. And again he sent another bondman, but they, having beaten him also, and cast insult upon him, sent him away empty. And again he sent a third, and they, having wounded him also, cast him out. And the Lord of the vineyard said, What shall I do? I will send my beloved son, perhaps when they see him they will respect him. But when the husbandmen saw him, they reasoned among themselves, saying, This is the heir, come, let us kill him, that the inheritance may become ours. And having cast him forth out of the vineyard, they killed him. What therefore shall the Lord of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those husbandmen, and will give the vineyard to others. And when they heard it they said, May it never be. But he looking at them said, What then is this that is written, The stone which they that builded rejected, this has become the cornerstone? Every one falling on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it shall grind him to powder. And the chief priests and the scribes sought the same hour to lay hands on him, and they feared the people, for they knew that he had spoken this parable of them. And having watched him, they sent out suborned persons, pretending to be just men, that they might take hold of him in his language, so that they might deliver him up to the power and authority of the governor. And they asked him, saying, Teacher, we know that thou sayest and teachest rightly, and acceptest no man's person, but teachest with truth the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar, or not? But perceiving their deceit he said to them, Why do ye tempt me? Shew me a denarius. Whose image and superscription has it? And answering they said, Caesar's. And he said to them, Pay therefore what is Caesar's to Caesar, and what is God's to God. And they were not able to take hold of him in his expressions before the people, and, wondering at his answer, they were silent. And some of the Sadducees, who deny that there is any resurrection, coming up to him, demanded of him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us, If anyone's brother, who has a wife, die, and he die childless, his brother shall take the wife and raise up seed to his brother. There were then 7 brethren, and the first, having taken a wife, died childless, and the second took the woman, and he died childless, and the third took her, and in like manner also the 7 left no children and died, and last of all the woman also died. In the resurrection therefore of which of them does she become wife? For the 7 had her as wife. And Jesus said to them, The sons of this world marry, and are given in marriage, but they who are counted worthy to have part in that world, and the resurrection from among the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, for neither can they die any more, for they are equal to angels, and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead rise, even Moses shewed in the section of the bush, when he called the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, but he is not God of the dead but of the living, for all live for him. And some of the scribes answering said, Teacher, thou hast well spoken. For they did not dare any more to ask him anything. And he said to them, How do they say that the Christ is David's son? And David himself says in the book of Psalms, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand until I put thine enemies as footstool of thy feet. David therefore calls him Lord, and how is he his son? And, as all the people were listening, he said to his disciples, Beware of the scribes, who like to walk about in long robes, and who love salutations in the marketplaces, and first seats in the synagogues, and first places at suppers, who devour the houses of widows, and as a pretext make long prayers. These shall receive a severer judgment. Luke 20. By F. B. Hole. Yet in the precincts of the temple the Lord taught daily during this last week of his life, so it is not surprising that he came into conflict with them. The whole of this chapter is occupied with details of the conflict. The chief priest and scribes began the conflict, and at the end they were left silenced and unmasked. They started by challenging his authority. They were the people in authority there, and to them he was but an upstart prophet from Nazareth. Their question assumed that they had the ability to judge of the Lord's credentials if he produced them, so he called upon them to settle the preliminary question as to the credentials of his forerunner, John. This at once put them in a quandary, for the answer they wished to give would have been resented by the people. They were time servers, courting popularity, so they pleaded ignorance. To such men as these the Lord did not produce his authority. Instead, he proceeded to speak with all the authority which omniscience gives, and they were very soon made to feel its power. There could be no doubt about his authority by the time the verbal conflict ceased. In the parable, which occupies verses 9 to 16, he set forth with great clearness the exact position of things at that moment. It reads like a continuation of the historical statements made in 2 Chronicles 36 verses 15 to 16. There it was God appealing by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, but all were mocked and misused until there was no remedy, and he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees. Here the story is carried a step further and the beloved Son is sent, only to be cast out and killed. Hence a worse chastisement than the Chaldeans was to come upon them. The psalmist had prophesied that the rejected stone should become the head of the corner, and Jesus added that all who fall upon that stone, or upon whom it shall fall, would be destroyed. They were at that moment stumbling on the stone, as Romans 9 verse 32 declares. The falling of the stone upon them, and upon the Gentile powers, will take place at the second advent, as Daniel 2 verse 34 shows. The chief priests and scribes felt the point and authority of his words, as we see in verse 19, but they were only thereby stirred up to more determined opposition, and they sent forth men of craft and deceit to entrap him in his words, if possible. They came with the question as to paying tribute to Caesar, and in this both Pharisees and Herodians united, sinking their animosities in common hatred of the Lord. The Lord's question, "Why tempt ye me?" showed that he was thoroughly aware of their craft. His request for the penny reveals his own poverty. The superscription on the penny was a witness to their subjection to Caesar. His reply thus was that they must render to Caesar his rights, and yield to God the rights that were his. It was because they had not rendered to God the things that were his that Caesar had acquired the rights of conquest over them. All this was so indubitable, when pointed out, that these crafty questioners were silenced. The question with which the Sadducees thought to entrap the Lord was founded upon ignorance. No doubt they had often perplexed the Pharisees with it, but then they had no more light than the Sadducees on the essential point which the Lord made so plain. He contrasted this world and that world, using really the word which means age. Now it will be the portion of some to obtain that age as living men on earth, without passing through death and resurrection, but those who obtain that age and the resurrection will enter upon altogether new conditions of life. They will be deathless as the angels, and marriage will have no application to them. The Lord was here beginning to bring to light life and incorruptibility, 2 Timothy 1 verse 10. New translation, and in result the Sadducees' question, which to their ignorance seemed so unanswerable, became merely ridiculous. The Lord proceeded to prove the resurrection from Exodus 3 verse 6. If the patriarchs were alive to God, centuries after they were dead to this world, their ultimate resurrection was a certainty. Thus he answered not only the foolish question of the Sadducees, but the unbelief that lay behind their question. And he answered it with such authority that even a scribe was moved to admiration and approval, and they all feared to ask him any more questions. The Lord then asked them his great question, based upon Psalm 110. Matthew records that no man was able to answer him a word. No answer was possible save to the faith that perceived the divine glory of the Christ, and they had no faith. They were silent in stubborn unbelief. Answer his question they could not, ask him any further question they dared not. It only remained for the Lord to unmask these evil men, and this he did in few words, as recorded in the 2 verses which close the chapter. They were hypocrites of the most desperate type, using religion as a cloak to cover their self-seeking and rapacity. He unmasked them, and pronounced their doom. He did not speak of a longer damnation, as though judgment were bounded by time and not eternal. But he did speak of greater damnation, showing that judgment will differ as to its severity. They suffer more abundant judgment, New Translation.